He was mid-sentence claiming Israel had become a global superpower when the sirens went off. Air raid alerts tore across central Israel. The IDF confirmed a new ballistic missile barrage inbound from Iran, the sixth of the day, and Benjamin Netanyahu kept talking. Not from a podium, not from a command room, from a Zoom call flanked by 2 Israeli flags, taking questions from reporters via video link because the security situation on the ground made gathering in person impossible for the leader of the most heavily armed country in the Middle East. That image matters. Not because it is embarrassing, because it is revealing. 13 days into Operation Roaring Lion, the most expensive military campaign since the opening phase of the Iraq invasion, Iran is still launching coordinated ballistic missile salvos at Israeli population centers, while the Prime Minister directing the war explains, over video conference, why the enemy is still standing. What happened at that press conference on March 12th was not simply a war update. It was an unintentional confession. And once you understand exactly what Netanyahu admitted, and once you place it alongside what American intelligence has been telling the White House since before the first bomb fell, the entire stated logic of this conflict begins to crack. This war began on February 28, 2026 with Operation Roaring Lion, a joint U.S.-Israeli campaign that opened with a targeted strike killing Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei inside a compound in Tehran. The scope was unprecedented. Within the first week, more than 6,000 targets had been struck across Iran. The Pentagon confirmed to the Senate Armed Services Committee that the first 6 days of operations alone cost over $11.3 billion. American officials called it Operation Epic Fury. The public messaging in those opening days was aggressive and deliberate. The IDF announced the destruction of 300 Iranian missile launchers. Officials cited reports of a 70% reduction in Iranian fire toward Israel. The combined message from Washington and Jerusalem was effectively the same. Overwhelming force, mission nearly accomplished, Iran's military machine on its knees. That framing held for roughly a week. Then the ground reality started pulling the narrative apart. At that March 12th press conference, Netanyahu said something that his communications team almost certainly did not intend to become the lead. He told reporters that Iran had been burying its missile capabilities and its nuclear infrastructure deep underground. He said that if Israel and America had not acted when they did, within a few months those weapons would have become, in his words, immune to any strike. Pause on that word, immune. A leader describing a campaign of annihilation does not reach for that word unless it is necessary. That word is an acknowledgement of a ceiling. It is the admission that there are systems, facilities, and stockpiles that the combined air power of the United States military and the Israeli Air Force cannot reliably reach or destroy. Netanyahu was not describing a defeated enemy. He was explaining why a not yet defeated enemy is still capable of sending 6 separate ballistic missile salvos at Israeli cities in a single day, 13 days into a war that his own office described on day 4 as a quick and decisive action. The word immune is the most important word spoken by any leader in this conflict so far, and almost no one is treating it that way. Here is what that admission actually means in operational terms. Israel's entire justification for the timing and scale of this campaign was the claim that the window to act was closing. Iran was accelerating its underground burial of nuclear and missile assets. The campaign had to happen now, or those assets would become unreachable. That logic has been used to justify every decision since February 28th. But if the campaign launched precisely because those assets were becoming immune to attack, and the campaign is now 13 days old, and Iran's ballistic missile forces are still conducting coordinated daily strikes on Israeli territory, then the operational premise and the operational reality are not matching. The visible event is 6 salvos in one day. The hidden meaning is a structural gap between what this campaign can destroy and what it cannot reach. The National Intelligence Council, the body that represents the consensus assessment of all major American intelligence agencies, completed a classified report before the first bomb dropped. Its conclusion was direct. Neither limited strikes nor a prolonged military campaign would be likely to produce regime change in Iran. That report was produced in February 2026. Multiple follow-up assessments reached the same conclusion. Sources described a consistent pattern of findings, all pointing to the same determination. The regime is not in danger. It retains control. It retains the loyalty of enough institutional actors to continue functioning as a government. Even a senior Israeli official acknowledged privately to Reuters that there is no certainty this war will bring down the clerical government. Now place that against Netanyahu's stated war objective. He told reporters that one of his core goals is to create the conditions for the Iranian people to expel their brutal regime. When a journalist pressed him directly on whether he could guarantee that outcome, he said he could not. He reached for a metaphor. You can lead someone to water, he said, but you cannot make him drink. He then addressed the Iranian people directly. Help is on the way, but at the end of the day, it is up to you. That is not the language of a commander describing a mission on track. That is a wartime leader outsourcing the success condition of a billion-dollar military campaign to a civilian population living under an active bombardment. It means the military instrument, by itself, cannot deliver the stated political objective. And the intelligence community of his most important ally told him that in writing before any of this started. The structural gap between the war's stated objective and what the war can actually achieve is the most dangerous fault line in this entire conflict. Because when a campaign cannot reach its goal and cannot stop, the only direction it has left is wider. Look at what happened to the civil defense architecture on the ground. Before the March 12th press conference, the single deadliest incident of this war occurred near Beit Shemesh, roughly 18 miles from Jerusalem. An Iranian ballistic missile struck a communal shelter inside a synagogue. 9 civilians were killed, dozens more wounded. 2 Israeli interceptors were launched at the incoming warhead, both missed. And critically, the air raid sirens in the area did not activate in time to provide the standard 90-second warning window that Israel's civil protection doctrine depends on. Iran's ballistic missiles can reach Israeli territory in approximately 10 minutes from launch. The entire national survival model rests on 3 sequential functions working together: early detection, timely alert, and functional intercept. At Beit Shemesh, all 3 failed at the same time. That is not a marginal malfunction in an otherwise sound system. That is a demonstration that the architecture of Israeli civil defense carries real structural exposure when faced with a sustained and sophisticated ballistic missile campaign. When the interceptors miss and the sirens lag, the shelter does not protect anyone. It concentrates them. On the same day as Netanyahu's press conference, Hezbollah launched over 200 rockets from Lebanon into central Israel in what the IDF described as a coordinated joint operation with Iran's ballistic missile salvos. The IDF struck rare targets in central Beirut outside the traditional Dahieh stronghold. Israeli ground forces pushed deeper into southern Lebanon, targeting Radwan force installations. Defense Minister Israel Katz issued evacuation orders south of the Zerani River. Senior Israeli defense officials warned privately that Hezbollah retains a large inventory of launchers and intends to conduct a war of attrition. Netanyahu was asked directly at the press conference about something he said in 2024. He had told the Israeli public that military strikes had set Hezbollah back 20 years. The journalist wanted to know how, if that claim was true, Hezbollah is currently firing 200 rockets a day into Israeli population centers. Netanyahu did not answer the question directly. He reframed it. He argued that before Israel struck Hezbollah, the group had the capacity to level Tel Aviv tower blocks and kill 15,000 to 20,000 Israelis. That did not happen, he said, because of Israeli military action. But then he acknowledged on the record that Hezbollah continues to be capable of attacking Israel. That sentence is a sitting prime minister confirming that a force publicly declared neutralized is conducting daily offensive operations against his country. Israel is not fighting a one-front war. It is fighting 2 simultaneous sustained campaigns with no defined endpoint in either direction. Now look at the economic architecture of this conflict, because that is where the widening consequences become visible to every country on Earth that is not in the Middle East. The Strait of Hormuz has been effectively closed for nearly 2 weeks. The IRGC declared that no oil would transit the waterway and threatened to destroy any vessel attempting the crossing. At least 16 documented attacks on commercial shipping have occurred in and around the strait since February 28th. 8 seafarers are confirmed dead, 1 is missing. Approximately 150 vessels are stranded. Iran planted naval mines in the waterway. The United States military responded by striking 16 Iranian mine-laying vessels, but the mines are already in the water. Brent crude climbed from approximately $73 per barrel before this war began to over $100 within the first 10 days. American gasoline prices have risen 17% since the conflict started. The International Energy Agency announced that its 32 member nations would collectively release 400 million barrels from emergency strategic reserves, the largest coordinated drawdown in the agency's history. Saudi Arabia began rerouting maritime trade to Red Sea ports to avoid the strait entirely. The IRGC's public forecast to global markets was explicit. Expect oil at $200 per barrel. Qatar's liquefied natural gas facilities, 2 of the largest in the world, were struck directly by Iranian forces and forced to shut down production. European natural gas futures jumped approximately 30% after Qatar went offline because Qatar supplies a substantial share of Europe's LNG import volume. The UAE intercepted 10 ballistic missiles and 26 drones on March 12th alone. Saudi Arabia stopped 12 drones the same day. The U.S. Embassy compound in Kuwait was struck. British forces at a base in Erbil, Iraq, came under fire. 7 American service members have been killed across the region. Iran has launched retaliatory strikes against at least 27 locations, hosting U.S. military personnel. This is no longer an Israel-Iran conflict. It is a regional war with direct financial consequences flowing into every energy-dependent economy on the planet. And here is the deeper pattern that all of these individual facts are pointing toward. The foundational assumption of this campaign was that sufficiently overwhelming force, applied at the right moment, could collapse an adversary's military capability quickly enough to produce political transformation before the costs became unsustainable. That assumption is not new. It was the operating logic behind the 2003 invasion of Iraq. It was applied with modifications in Libya. It has failed in both instances to produce the stable political transformation it was designed to generate. The National Intelligence Council told the White House in February 2026 that this logic would not hold in Iran either. The assessment was not a minority view. It was the consensus of the entire American intelligence community. The campaign proceeded anyway. 13 days later, Mojtaba Khamenei, described by multiple analysts as more hardline than his assassinated father, is issuing defiant statements from an undisclosed location, threatening to keep the Strait of Hormuz closed as a tool of strategic pressure against the West. He has not appeared in public. He may have been wounded. But the regime did not fracture when the supreme leader died. It convened its assembly, selected a successor within days, issued commands, maintained its ballistic missile launch schedule, and coordinated offensive operations with Hezbollah simultaneously across 2 fronts. That is not the behavior of a structure on the edge of collapse. That is the behavior of a system that anticipated decapitation and built contingency around it. Netanyahu cannot guarantee regime change. The intelligence community said regime change was unlikely from the start. The new supreme leader is more radical than the one who was killed. Iran's missile forces are still firing, Hezbollah is still launching, 7 Americans are dead, the Strait of Hormuz is mined, oil has crossed $100, schools across Israel are closed, the civil defense system has failed under live fire, and the man directing this entire campaign held his first press conference via Zoom from an undisclosed secure location, while incoming ballistic missiles sent his own population underground. The opening salvo of this war killed a supreme leader that was supposed to be the beginning of the end. 13 days later, there is a new supreme leader. He is in hiding, he is issuing threats, and the missiles have not stopped. What this moment reveals is not a campaign going wrong at the margins. It is a campaign built on an assumption that the intelligence community already knew was false. The stated objective cannot be delivered by the military instrument being used to pursue it. The costs are compounding in every direction simultaneously, and no actor on any side has been able to articulate what a realistic ending actually looks like. That gap between the war that was promised and the war that is actually being fought is not a communications problem. It is a strategic one. And in conflicts where the strategy does not match the reality, the pressure to escalate becomes the only remaining tool. The sirens are still going off, the missiles are still coming, and no one at the podium or on the Zoom call has an answer for what happens next.